Hey everyone, and here we are, the end of the Crash-A-Thon, the final hurdle, so we really ought to go out with a bang. And by bang, I of course mean a crippling double dose of horrific mediocrity. Crash of the Titans and Mind Over Mutant. Sometimes even the very mention is enough to make certain fans recoil in discomfort. After the fun hot mess that was Twinsanity, Universal handed over development duty to Radical Entertainment, who developed Tag Team Racing. Spoiler alert! So they instead opted for something different for the next mainline Crash outing. The good news is that it wasn't anything like Tag Team Racing. The bad news is that it was Crash of the Titans. This and Mind Over Mutant are two of the most infamous entries of the entire franchise. Essentially doing a soft reboot of sorts, completely changing the gameplay and art style from the already established formula. It was a ballsy move on their part, and to say that it paid off would be a big fat old lie. Now, since both of these games are cut from the same cloth, I thought it would be better to go over them in the same video, so let's begin with Crash of the Titans. I have not played this game in years, probably not since I was like 9-10 years old. I mainly played it around a friend's house in co-op, and I seem to remember enjoying it. But then again, I was a kid who couldn't really make rational critique of things and just lapped up whatever was given to me. So let's go back to it now and see if it has any redeeming qualities. Now firstly, I think I should address the big dead bloated hippo in the middle of the room that looks like this. The character redesigns. To put it gently, yeah, they're fuck ugly. Now, I get that with the new art style they go for, it will of course mean that they had to adapt the character's looks to suit it. But dear God, what did they do here? The ones that do retain a somewhat closer resemblance to their original forms either have some really weird proportions, really bizarre details, and unexpressive faces that seem either too big or too small. And then there's the characters who for no good reason whatsoever have just been completely redone with new designs, looking like cheap Chinese knockoff brands trying to avoid copyright. They either just scream of trying to be modernized or going as far out of their way to avoid looking like their original counterparts. I mean, Jesus, Uka Uka looks like a chewed up toenail. Anyway, the setup for this game involves Cortex coming to kidnap Coco and Aku Aku, but Crash manages to save the latter, and so now we must go off to save Coco. And the one big jarring thing you'll notice when beginning the game is the way it plays. It ditches the tight, dense, well-designed corridor platforming for a more standard beat-em-up game with very light platforming elements. You're still going through linear levels, but with more wider and really barren level designs, alternating between combat-focused sections and platforming sections. Yeah, it's really weird to see Crash become centered around combat, and it's not even really that good of combat either. It's the most basic, button-mashing, repetitive slog you can think of. All you do is attack and dodge against the same basic enemies over and over again, nothing else. It really is the most rudimentary way of doing something like this. Oh, and you can also spin, but you have to unlock it. Yes, Crash has to unlock his signature spin move. The one thing that changes up the combat is the main focus of this game, the Titans. When you come across the Titans, you have to hit them a few times until they're dizzy, and then you can commit the horrifically named act of controlling them known as jacking. I am struggling so hard right now not to make a joke out of this. I can jack this Titan, that Titan, I'm jacking a Titan right now. This is disgusting. Once you jack a Titan, you can then control it and use its abilities, which mainly focus around more combat moves, activating or removing blockages to your path, or slightly different ways of maneuvering. Now granted, I actually really like the unique designs given to each one, and controlling them is slightly satisfying for a few brief moments. But unfortunately, they're not really used that creatively. It is again just extremely basic and uninspired. Between these spells of combat, we get to engage in some platforming, you know, the thing that Crash was kinda known for. It is, however, unfortunately some of the most flat and unengaging platforming out there. Now, there are some cool new elements to it, like wall running, wall jumping, the sliding sections. They're all pretty good fun additions, but for the most part, the level design is so barren and lazy. It's not precise, well designed, it just does the bare minimum. There's also no gems or crystals to collect this time, only these orbs called Mojo, which are collected for upgrades to your moveset, and occasionally these little voodoo dolls which unlock some bonuses like concept art. And to be honest, there's not really much else I can say about the game. What you see is what you get. This is the long and short of it. There honestly isn't a whole lot more I can say really that would matter. It is nothing more than a generic beat 'em up with some platforming elements sprinkled in. It actually reminds me a lot of the first Knack now that I think about it, and that's not really meant as a compliment. If I were to say anything I did like about it, it's that I think the character designs aside, the presentation is kinda decent. While the music is mostly forgettable, I do like the art style and the colour palette of the visuals, and I really like the scope and the environments in this game. And the game does technically work, it's mechanically sound. But the gameplay and design is just insufferably boring and not fun to play for me. So much so that I couldn't be asked to carry on after the 4th level, it just didn't engage me whatsoever. So with not much else to say on that, let's move on to Crash Mind Over Mutant. Once again developed by Radical Entertainment, it released 1 year after Titans and acts as a direct sequel. Now one thing I should mention is that I have never played this game before. The only thing I have seen from it are the cutscenes, but outside of that, this will be my first experience actually playing the game. Right off the bat, we can explore Crash's house and we get a little screen with some character bios and this artwork, which I can only assume is some fan art from some kids. I mean, whatever it is, it looks better than Boom Bang at least. The story this time around is that after the event of Titans, Cortex has returned and made up with Dr. Nitrous Brio. Together, they develop a device called the NV, which they plan to trick people into putting on their heads, turning them into mutants. Unlike Titan's linear level-by-level structure, Mind Over Mutant actually opts for an open exploratory layout, with missions dictating where you need to go and explore. But it's not a sprawling open world as such, it's just a bunch of linear paths all interconnected as one world, though to its credit, it's done fairly decently. Gameplay-wise, I don't really know what else to tell you other than that it's the same thing as Titans. It still has the same hack and slash beat 'em up style of combat and platforming in between, but to its credit, it's done a lot better than how Titans did it. The combat, okay, is still really pathetic, but it has a slight bit more depth to it this time. It does have some actual reaction and countering attacks to add a tad bit of strategy to it, which is at the very least something. The one thing that did get a big improvement is the platforming. There's a much bigger emphasis on it this time round, with even some more mechanics like burrowing and wall climbing. The actual design of the platforming has seen a vast improvement too, leaning into something a bit more closer to what Twinsanity was sort of like. It's still far off the tight and dense levels of the original games, or even to Twinsanity for that matter, but it's still an improvement of what came before it. The Titans also return in this game, yay, more jacking for me, and again they are done a bit better in this game. While there are less Titans than last time, each one is a bit more substantial with their moveset, not only contributing more to the combat but with platforming as well, using their abilities to reach new areas. And you can now store a Titan ready for whenever you want to use it on the fly, making their implementation seem a lot more natural and seamless in the gameplay. Despite all these improvements though, ultimately, when all is said and done, at its core, the gameplay is still the same as Titans. It's still very generic and fairly unengaging overall, though yes, it does do almost every aspect better than Titans. It's still not enough to make it feel not like a repetitive, boring slog, especially since the mission-based structure leads to a lot of backtracking, which does get very annoying. However, if there's anything I need to praise Mind Over Mutant for, it's the cutscenes, and hell, even the writing and comedy in general. Titan's cutscenes were all done in Engine, and while granted its writing had 1 or 2 funny moments.
Mika, sucker!
Hey, genius, I can't actually hear you. I'm really far away, and I'm flying like a hovercraft or something.
What do you mean? Thank you again!
Its attempts at humour for the most part fall completely flat on its arse. Mind Over Mutant, however, is a completely different story. Each individual cutscene is done in a different animation style, giving a lot of variety into how the characters are presented and how visual jokes are told. And the humour and writing is a lot more self-aware and incredibly witty this time round, with some genuinely hilarious moments. And this is all helped by the great delivery from the cast, especially Maurice LaMarche as Nitrous Brio. He is definitely one of the highlights from this game for me.
Yes, it is I, Embryo. My name sounds like fetus.
Now, the presentation overall isn't really a whole lot different than Titan's. It's still the same art style and terrible character designs, but just with a few more visual gags here and there. Well, hey Crunch, if you like looking at that, then let me tell you about this thing you can do in this game called jacking. On another quick side note, the soundtrack to this game is actually really damn good. It's surprisingly upbeat and really punchy, with a really nice quirky tone to it that suits the game fantastically. Overall, I don't have much more to say about Mind Over Mutant other than that it's just a better version of Titans, which I will say I was pleasantly surprised to find out. However, because of that, it still does share a lot of the same baked-in flaws that Titans had as well. But above all else with these two games, the big overarching issue that really stops it from being enjoyable is that it's simply not Crash. As they are very standard generic platforming button mashing beat 'em ups. On their own, they work fine, I guess. They work well and control fine for what they are. But in the end, as Crash Bandicoot games, yeah, these are both pretty horrendous. Now, I know that these games have their fans, some of which will just say that people hate on these games for being different. And to those people, I say this. It's one thing to try something new and different. It's another thing entirely to abandon the gameplay that the series was known for in favour of a completely different and alienating gameplay style. This right here is what Crash Bandicoot always was at its core. Simple yet addictive and engaging, densely packed, tight and precise linear platforming with that familiar charm. These two games are just such a far cry from that. It is perfectly justified and understandable why these two games are so revered by many in the fanbase. In terms of gameplay, they are simply not Crash Bandicoot. It's blatantly obvious looking back at it that the more modernized designs and the incredibly simplistic approach to gameplay means that these games were geared to a more younger audience. Its basic boring style of gameplay left no impact for me personally, though I can see some of the effort shining through, especially in Mind Over Mutant. If you like these games, good for you, but for many Crash fans, despite some of their better merits, they will mostly be remembered for unfortunately bastardizing the franchise and leading it to its original demise. And that is all I have to say regarding these two games. And with that, I can now bring a firm close to the Crash-A-Thon. And I want to take this moment to thank every single one of you for joining me on this journey for the past 3 months, and for all the support you have shown me during this time. Doing this marathon has been such a fun and wonderful, creatively fulfilling experience, and I'm so glad that many of you have enjoyed this. This franchise, despite all the ups and downs, is very special to me, and it remains to this day my favourite overall video game series. It's been a blast reliving my experiences with these games, but this time sharing that with all of you, and getting to examine how this series has changed over all this time. But now, all this has been leading up to the main event. The series revival in 2017 with the Insane trilogy has given the franchise new life again, and it has allowed for the prospect of a brand new game in the series. One that we have been waiting for years, and one that brings us back to the classic style of Crash we all know and love, and that game is just around the corner now. Thank you all, every single one of you, for watching the Crash-A-Thon and for all the love and support you have shown throughout this series. Feel free to like and subscribe if you feel like it, and I'll see you guys for Crash Bandicoot 4. Take care.